Hi, thank you all for coming to my talk about my master's research on the role of place attachment in volunteer monitoring, a transnational pilot study of engaging and retaining volunteers. Just a brief overview before we get started. I'll show an introduction of volunteer monitoring and the current literature on motivations and outcomes. Briefly touch on place attachment, the purpose of this research and research questions, methodology that I used, including the survey and interview design, and then touch on the preliminary results and analysis. So volunteer monitoring is a growing field of scientific research, in which members of the general public engage in scientific research, and they're involved in mostly data collection, but also other aspects of the scientific process. Volunteer monitoring is most commonly known as citizen science, but it's also known as public participation in scientific research, community science, community-based monitoring, and many other names. And volunteer monitoring covers a wide range of environmental disciplines, including but not limited to those that look at wildlife and land management, ecology, biology, conservation, water resource management as well. Just a brief background on the current literature on motivation categories of volunteer monitoring. So this is a list of the most commonly cited motivations for participating in volunteer monitoring. And in the literature, helping the environment has been seen to be the most common reason that people decide to serve as a volunteer monitor, in general. And these are also some of the outcomes of participating that people experience, including knowledge gain, social and personal benefits. They meet new friends, they get to share knowledge with their peers, with their family members. And the piece I'd like to touch on as well is place attachment. As a result of monitoring, some people have experienced an attachment to the place where they monitor. And place attachment has been found to lead people to have more environmentally responsible behaviors. And they take actions based on this person-place relationship that affects their volunteer experiences, but also maybe makes them want to protect the place where they monitor more. So, as I said, place attachment, it's a complex, multifaceted concept shaped by symbolic meanings and personal identity associated with a place, and it's been described as a personal, emotional, and affective bond that someone has between their place and between a particular place and their environment. So the purpose of this research is to determine if place attachment is a category of motivation and to better understand and compare motivations and outcomes in volunteer stream-based motivations and outcomes of volunteers in stream-based water monitoring programs in 3 countries, the United States, Canada, and New Zealand. So with that, the research questions are, does place attachment influence participants' decision to volunteer? And if so, does this level of attachment differ between new and experienced volunteers? New volunteers being those that have just started in 2018 or 2019, experienced volunteers being those who have monitored in 2017 or earlier. Secondly, do the motivations of participants change over time? Is there variance in the top motivations of volunteers between countries? And does participation in volunteer monitoring lead volunteers to change their actions and or behaviors towards the environment? So the study sites, I worked with a group called the Alliance for Aquatic Resource Monitoring, which is in the New York and Pennsylvania area of the Chesapeake Bay watershed in the US. The Columbia Basin Watershed Network over in British Columbia, Canada, and the little blob shape there is the rough outline of the Columbia River watershed, and as well as the Stream Health Monitoring and Assessment Kit program in New Zealand, and those groups are in the Wellington region of New Zealand. So for my methodology, I administered a survey this past summer. It was online, and I sent it to 24 monitoring groups in those 3 countries. I organized and facilitated the contact with their program directors to disseminate the survey, as well as following up with weekly email reminders. The survey was open for a total of 4 weeks for each of these groups. And it addressed primary questions such as those about their monitoring site, how they selected their site, how close do they live to their site, how often do they visit their site for monitoring, as well as why did people decide to monitor, and what actions they take as both a volunteer and as an individual. I'm following up with some of those survey respondents with interviews, and so I'm doing a random selection of survey respondents and interviewing them to get more in-depth narratives about why they monitor, and particularly how they feel about their site, the importance to them of monitoring, to their community, to the broader environment. So just some preliminary results. The survey was sent to about 213 total people, and 92 total volunteers responded. They either completed or partially completed the survey, partially completed being if they filled out half of it and I was still able to use that data, but they didn't complete the survey. And that's about a 45% response rate, so I was really happy with that. And the response rate did not include those volunteers who were sent the survey but don't monitor streams, because I'm only interested in stream-based programs. This slide is a bit overwhelming, I realize. I'm not going to spend much time on it, but it just lists all of the motivations that were included in the survey on the list, on the left, and then on the right is the breakdown between countries and the frequency that people said that served as a motivation for why they volunteer. And I just show this because I think it's really interesting to see the variety of motivations, both across countries and just as a general whole. More specifically, I'd like to talk about the top motivations in each country. So I asked volunteers to rank their first, second, and third motivation for why they decided to volunteer with this program. And I found that in the United States, most people were concerned about water quality issues, whereas in Canada and New Zealand, most people volunteered because they wanted to help protect or restore aquatic ecosystems. The second most common motivation that people cite, or that was their second reason for volunteering, is that across the board, all volunteers wanted to help protect or restore aquatic ecosystems. So in Canada and New Zealand, just kind of supporting that first motivation that these people really just want to help protect and restore the ecosystems that are around them. And the third motivation was that people are concerned about water quality issues, again, in the United States, kind of seeing a theme there. Whereas in Canada, people wanted to participate in scientific research or wanted to contribute to scientific knowledge. Both of those received the same number of people saying that that was their third motivation. And in Canada, New Zealand, folks are concerned about fish and or other aquatic life. I also broke down the motivations between new volunteers and experienced volunteers overall, because the difference between new volunteers and experienced volunteers within countries I actually found was not much different. So in a general sense, those new volunteers who were just starting want to help protect or restore aquatic ecosystems, whereas experienced volunteers are more concerned about water quality issues. With that, I asked people to share what environmentally responsible behaviors they took as a result of participating, so actions they did not take before they became a monitor, and what do they do now that they hadn't before. And the most frequent action that folks took as a result of monitoring is that they became more engaged in decision-making about the environment. Secondly, they engaged in stewardship activities. And thirdly, people wrote letters to the editor of a local news source or a publication about a particular environmental issue. And then from this, I asked for place-related behaviors as well, which are those that volunteers took that they hadn't before, but that are related to the specific place where they monitor. So I'm interested to know what actions that are environmentally responsible that they took that were related to their monitoring site or to that monitoring area. Again, people became publicly engaged in decision-making about that particular place. They engaged in stewardship activities at that particular place, and they also made donations to protect this place. And the reason that these actions and outcomes are important is for program directors to better understand why people are volunteering, to increase recruitment and retention of volunteers. And also this actions piece can help program directors be able to say that not only are they collecting data about a particular stream, whether that be water quality, whether that be monitoring, habitats or planting native plants, something of that nature, but people are also becoming more engaged in the community and are wanting to, to donate, to serve on a board to protect their place. So I will, leave you with this quote from a water monitor in New Zealand. They said, "We all have a role in mitigating the impacts of human settlement on the environment. This is one step that we in this community can take." And I'll be doing more thematic analysis of the interviews once I go through that data. But just looking at the themes that came up in the data, and this was one of them, is that people seem to really want to be involved in their community and that they're interested in the place that they monitor. So thank you to all of these people. Thank you to my advisor, Chris Stepanek, for being here this evening and for supporting me in this research endeavor, and for all of my collaborators. So I'll open up for questions.
We have 2 minutes for questions.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, your choice of, and I suppose some of that might have been built into Chris's grant, but your choice of those 3 different places suggests that you might have some hypotheses or interest in knowing whether people in different places have different attachments to the place. And I wonder, other than the things that you've flashed up on the board about that, if your research has generated any sort of hypotheses more broadly about how place influences attachment to place or like geographic setting.
Sure. So our collaborators were connected with Chris and then therefore connected with me, and we're interested to know more about their programs, particularly in Canada and New Zealand. They don't know much about their volunteers, and so they were really interested to know why their volunteers do what they do. And we kind of have our own hypotheses about each place. And for example, in the U.S., with the Clean Water Act, there were a lot of programs that kind of came out of that where people said, okay, there's a problem, we need to do something about it. They're funded by universities or by some organization. We don't see that in Canada or New Zealand, and that's what I've learned through my collaborators there as well. In Canada, they're very grassroots. They don't have funding, they don't have support. People just have this desire to protect a place, or they see a problem and they want to do something about it. And I sensed something similar in New Zealand too. And even the language they use about their groups is slightly different. They're called community groups in New Zealand. So I think that might have something to do with why people decide to monitor and yeah, that as well. Mm-hmm.
So we're up for questions. If you have questions for Rachel, she's going to be at the reception.
Got it.
So yeah, so thanks, Rachel.
Thanks.